A tanker moves across the Sea of Azov. No name on its hull that matches any registry. No legitimate cargo declaration. No flag that corresponds to a real owner. Just a vessel pushing through shallow brown water, carrying Russian crude toward a buyer who doesn't ask questions, under a transponder identity borrowed from a ship that was scrapped 3 years ago. This is how sanctions die. Not in courtrooms. Not in diplomatic cables. In the shallow inland sea between two countries at war, on a ship that officially doesn't exist, moving oil that officially was never produced, toward money that officially never changed hands. The operators watching this tanker on their screens had been tracking it for 11 days. 3 ports, 2 transponder swaps, 1 escort change. And now, finally, the vessel was moving in open water, far enough from shore radar to make the approach window viable. This is the story of what happened when 2 low-profile Ukrainian naval surface drones closed the last kilometer. I'm your host at Ukraine Radar, where we analyze the battles that change wars. This one didn't just change a battle. It changed the math for every ship still moving Russian crude under a false identity in these waters. The Sea of Azov is not an ocean. It's barely a sea by any meaningful definition. At its deepest point, it reaches 14 meters. At its widest, it stretches 200 kilometers. Its water is brown-green and brackish, fed by the Don and Kuban rivers, and it sits behind the Kerch Strait like a geographic afterthought, an inland puddle compared to the Black Sea it connects to. That geography was supposed to make it safe for Russian logistics. Before the full-scale war entered its current phase, Russian military planners treated the Azov as a protected lake. Crimea controlled the western approach through Kerch. Russian-held coastline dominated the northern and eastern shores. Any surface vessel approaching from the Ukrainian side would face coastal radar, patrol boats, and air cover from bases that ringed the water on 3 sides. The Shadow Fleet found this geography attractive for exactly those reasons. Tankers moving through the Azov didn't need to brave the open Black Sea, where NATO surveillance assets and Ukrainian naval drones had already demonstrated they could reach. The Azov was shallower, shorter, contained. A ship could move from the Russian port of Kavkaz on the eastern shore, transit to the Kerch Strait, and pass into the Black Sea for onward voyages to Turkey or further destinations, all within what Russian planners considered a controlled envelope. Ukrainian naval intelligence analysts had spent months studying this assumption, not to agree with it, to disprove it. The Shadow Fleet operation that culminated in this strike had its origins in a piece of satellite imagery captured by a commercial provider during a routine tasking pass. The image showed a tanker that Ukrainian analysts recognized as a vessel that had been flagged by European maritime intelligence for sanctions evasion. It was operating under a different name. Its automatic identification system transponder was transmitting coordinates that didn't match the vessel's actual position by nearly 4 kilometers, a standard Shadow Fleet technique for masking true location. But satellite imagery doesn't care about transponder lies. The vessel was where it was. And Ukrainian intelligence officers who had been building target packages on the Shadow Fleet's Azov logistics corridor recognized the opportunity. Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? A. The naval drones themselves. B. The intelligence network that tracked the tanker across 3 ports. C. The decoy maneuver that drew the escort out of position? Comment below. The tanker's name, for operational purposes, was Target Victor 7. That wasn't her real name or her false name. It was the designation assigned by the Ukrainian Naval Intelligence Cell coordinating the operation. 11 days earlier, she had been photographed loading at a facility on the Russian eastern coastline. The cargo, crude oil from a field whose output was subject to the European Union price cap mechanism. The destination on her paperwork, a Turkish intermediate port. The actual destination, unclear, but consistent with Shadow Fleet distribution patterns that ended in Asian markets willing to buy discounted Russian crude. 3 ports. Each time she arrived, she transmitted a different AIS identity. Each time she departed, Ukrainian satellite tasking captured her actual position. The analysts built a pattern. They understood her speed profile, her draft when loaded, her tendency to hug the Russian coastline in the northern Azov before turning south toward Kerch. Most importantly, they understood her escort. The Russian patrol boat assigned to this section of the logistics corridor was a Raptor-class vessel, Project 03160, roughly 27 meters long and capable of 48 knots in ideal conditions. The Sea of Azov in the relevant season was not ideal conditions. Chop and shallow water turbulence limited practical speed to around 32 knots. The patrol boat carried a crew of 6 and was armed with a 23mm autocannon and machine gun mounts. Not a warship by any serious definition, but enough to complicate an approach by a single drone, enough to detect and report any surface contact before it reached engagement range. Ukrainian planners had accounted for this. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes destroys a vessel that Moscow thought geometry alone could protect. The escort vessel was the problem, not an insurmountable one, but a real one. A single Ukrainian naval drone approaching the tanker would be detected by the patrol boat at approximately 4 to 6 kilometers, depending on sea state and the boat's radar operational status. At that range, the escort could accelerate to intercept, warn the tanker, and either ram or engage the drone with direct fire before it closed to striking distance. The Raptor-class vessels had already been used in this role along the Azov corridor. Russian commanders understood the drone threat. They had adapted in the way Russian forces sometimes do. Slowly, partially, but enough to complicate the attack calculus. The Ukrainian solution was simple. Don't attack the tanker first. Attack the escort's attention. The decoy package was a single modified surface drone, not a Magura V5, the primary strike variant, but a smaller, faster unit designed to simulate an incoming attack from an unexpected bearing. It was deployed from a position on the northern Azov coastline in Ukrainian-controlled territory, launched at a time calculated to reach the escort's radar detection range at a specific moment in the transit. The decoy came from the northwest, bearing 285. Fast, aggressive, following a course that would take it directly toward the patrol boat, not the tanker. To the Raptor-class commander, this looked like exactly what it was designed to look like, a direct drone attack on his vessel. He did exactly what Ukrainian planners expected. He turned to intercept. He accelerated. He moved his boat northwest, away from the tanker, toward the incoming threat. The moment the escort broke from its protective position beside the tanker, it opened a corridor. A 900-meter gap between the patrol boat and the vessel it was supposed to be protecting. 2 Magura V5 drones, which had been holding at low speed in a position approximately 4 kilometers to the southeast, outside the patrol boat's primary radar coverage arc, received their activation signal. They accelerated to their operational speed of 42 knots. Now let's be precise about what the Magura V5 is, because this weapon is central to everything that happened in the next 8 minutes. The Magura V5 is a Ukrainian-developed surface naval drone. Its full designation comes from the Ukrainian acronym for Maritime Autonomous Guard Unmanned Reconnaissance Attack. The vessel is approximately 5.5 meters long, sits extremely low in the water. Its profile at operational speed is under 30 centimeters above the surface, and carries a warhead payload in the range of 320 kilograms of explosive material. It is controlled remotely over a satellite link and uses a combination of GPS navigation, camera feeds, and operator override for terminal guidance. Its range exceeds 800 kilometers. Its speed reaches 42 knots under optimal conditions. Ukrainian naval forces had already used the Magura V5 to devastating effect against Russian Black Sea Fleet vessels. The platform had demonstrated it could sink vessels significantly larger than the Shadow Fleet tanker now crossing the Azov. How many vessels did Ukraine's naval drone program damage or destroy in the Black Sea and Azov combined during this operational period? A. 23. B. 38. C. 50. Answer at the end. But the Magura's specifications only tell part of the story. The other part is the operator. The 2 drones closing on target Victor 7 were being controlled by a team of Ukrainian naval drone operators based at a hardened facility on the Ukrainian-controlled northern Azov coast. The team consisted of 2 primary operators and 1 mission coordinator. Between them, they had logged hundreds of hours on Magura platforms and had participated in previous naval drone operations in both the Azov and Black Sea theaters. The mission coordinator was responsible for deconfliction, making sure the 2 drones weren't interfering with each other's approach vectors, and that the decoy was continuing to hold the escort's attention long enough for the strike vehicles to reach the tanker. At 42 knots, 4 kilometers translates to approximately 3 minutes and 20 seconds of transit time. The tanker's crew had, by this point, almost certainly seen something on their own radar. A vessel moving at 42 knots in the Sea of Azov doesn't look like a fishing boat, but the tanker's options were limited. She was a loaded crude carrier in shallow water. Her maximum speed was approximately 11 knots. She couldn't outrun anything. She couldn't call for the escort because the escort was currently racing northwest toward what it believed was a direct attack on itself. Subscribe to Ukraine Radar if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. What the tanker's crew did in those 3 minutes is, in a sense, irrelevant to the tactical outcome. What they experienced, what those moments were like on the bridge of a vessel suddenly aware of what was coming, is another matter. The Sea of Azov was hazy that morning. Visibility was reduced by summer evaporation off the warm, shallow water. The humidity was high. The sea surface had a slight chop from a wind that had been building since before dawn. From the bridge of the tanker, the approaching drones would have been visible as low, dark shapes, moving fast, their wakes catching the morning light. There is no glamour in this picture. There are people on that bridge who understand exactly what they are looking at. And there are Ukrainian operators at screens hundreds of kilometers away who have spent 11 days and hundreds of hours building the intelligence picture that brought this moment into existence. The first Magura V5 struck the tanker on the port side, aft of amidships, at the junction between the cargo section and the engine room bulkhead. This was not accidental. The operators had studied the vessel's profile from satellite imagery and understood that this area of the hull represented the most structurally significant target, the point where a detonation would most effectively compromise both the cargo containment and the propulsion system, eliminating any possibility of the vessel making it to port under her own power. 320 kilograms of explosive material, detonating against the steel hull of a shallow draft tanker, produces a specific sequence of effects. The initial blast creates a pressure wave that moves through the hull structure at a speed the metal cannot accommodate. The hull fails. Water enters. The cargo space, containing crude oil under pressure from the loaded state, creates a secondary ignition risk as fuel contacts hot metal from the structural failure. The second Magura V5 struck 18 seconds later, forward of the first impact point, on the same port side. This was the mission coordinator's decision, to ensure that even if the tanker's flooding was initially contained by watertight compartmentalization, a second breach would overcome any damage control effort the crew could mount in a vessel that was not military hardened. The fire started within 40 seconds of the first impact. In the shallow water of the Azov, a burning tanker is visible for kilometers in every direction. The smoke column was observed by commercial satellite imagery and later analyzed by open-source investigators who cross-referenced the location with the last known position of target Victor 7. The patrol boat, which had been racing northwest to intercept the decoy drone, received a radio call from the tanker within the first minute. By the time the Raptor-class vessel had reversed course and was heading back toward the tanker at maximum speed, the situation on the target vessel had already progressed past the point where the patrol boat could influence the outcome. The escort arrived to find a vessel low in the water, on fire, with crew members deploying emergency equipment. The tanker did not sink immediately. Shallow water tanker casualties in the Azov rarely do. The water depth in this area was approximately 8 meters, meaning that even a vessel settling on the bottom would have her superstructure above the surface. But a vessel on the bottom of the Azov, on fire, with structural compromise, is operationally destroyed. She was not going to be repaired. She was not going to move Russian crude again. Is this what maritime escalation looks like when it works? A shattered hull in 8 meters of water, a burning cargo, an escort that was out of position for the 60 seconds that mattered? Comment your analysis. The geometry of this operation has implications for every protected logistics corridor. If you believe tactics win wars, type Ukraine radar in the comments. The intelligence story behind this strike is in some ways more significant than the strike itself. 3 ports, 11 days. Multiple satellite tasking passes coordinated across providers. Analysis of AIS spoofing patterns to identify the vessel despite her transponder changes. Understanding of the escort's patrol pattern and behavioral tendencies. Construction of a decoy approach that exploited the escort commander's predictable response to a direct threat. None of that happened by accident. Ukraine had been building its Shadow Fleet intelligence capability for an extended period, and the Azov operation reflected how far that capability had come. Ukrainian naval intelligence had access to commercial satellite imagery from multiple providers, cross-referenced against maritime tracking databases that compile AIS transmissions globally. When a vessel performs AIS spoofing, transmitting false position or identity data, it creates detectable signatures, the offset between transmitted position and actual satellite-observed position. Patterns of identity change at specific ports. Cargo loading signatures visible in draft measurements taken from imagery. Ukrainian analysts had become skilled at reading these signatures. The network of vessels operating in the Shadow Fleet's Azov corridor was not unlimited. There were a finite number of tankers capable of transiting the Kerch Strait at the relevant draft loading. Ukrainian intelligence had been building files on each of them. The decoy operation itself required additional capability. The ability to deploy a drone from Ukrainian-controlled territory in the northern Azov, directed on a specific bearing toward the escort, and maintain that direction for the duration of the operation without the decoy being destroyed prematurely. Ukrainian drone operators had practiced this scenario in training exercises. The decoy's role was not to strike anything. Its role was to move aggressively toward the patrol boat and maintain that aggressive movement long enough for the strike drones to complete their approach. In the event, the decoy was intercepted and destroyed by the patrol boat's autocannon at approximately 1.5 kilometers. close enough to the boat that the engagement occupied the escort crew's full attention for several critical minutes. By the time the autocannon fire had stopped and the crew was assessing the intercept result, the strike drones had already reached the tanker. The total elapsed time from the moment the decoy was first detected on the patrol boat's radar to the moment of the second Magura impact on the tanker was 11 minutes and 30 seconds. 11 minutes and 30 seconds to dismantle a logistics chain that Moscow thought geography had made invulnerable. Now let's talk about the broader context, because this operation did not happen in isolation. The Shadow Fleet is not a small problem. Ukrainian and Western estimates suggest that Russia has assembled several hundred vessels operating outside normal maritime regulatory frameworks to circumvent oil price caps and sanctions regimes imposed following the full-scale invasion. These vessels carry Russian crude from Russian ports to intermediate buyers, primarily in Turkey, the UAE, and increasingly in Asian markets. The revenue from these sales finances Russian military production. European and American sanctions have targeted the financial infrastructure of the Shadow Fleet, the insurance companies, the classification societies, the ship management firms that keep these vessels moving. The price cap mechanism attempts to limit the revenue Russia receives per barrel, but the vessels keep moving. Their crude keeps flowing. The revenue, while reduced, continues. Direct physical interdiction of Shadow Fleet vessels was, prior to the Azov operation, largely theoretical. In international waters, military interdiction of civilian-flagged vessels raises complex legal questions. In Russian-controlled waters, Ukrainian forces obviously couldn't operate surface vessels. In the Azov, a shallow inland sea where Russian geographic control had been assumed since early in the war, direct interdiction hadn't been seriously tested. The Magura V5 operation changed that assumption. At the same time that Ukrainian naval drone operators were running the decoy-and-strike sequence against Target Victor 7, reporting in open source indicated that American planners were analyzing the feasibility of sea drone operations against sanctioned tanker traffic in other theaters. The parallel was noted by multiple Western defense analysts. Ukraine, as it has done repeatedly in this war, was running the field experiment that others were watching from a distance. What NATO would have done differently with these resources is an open question worth thinking about seriously. Would a NATO naval force have attempted a surface interdiction in international waters, triggering a legal confrontation? Would they have relied on financial sanctions and secondary pressure alone? Or would they, faced with the same intelligence package and the same escort problem, have reached for the same solution? Comment your analysis below. Real tactics. Real consequences. Ukraine radar. The Russian response to the Azov strike followed a pattern familiar from previous Ukrainian naval drone operations against Black Sea Fleet assets. Initial denial, then acknowledgement that an incident had occurred, then framing of the incident as a terrorist attack rather than a legitimate military operation against a sanctions-evading vessel. Russian state media described the tanker as a civilian vessel, technically accurate in terms of formal registration, though deeply misleading about the vessel's actual function in the military economic complex supporting Russian operations. The escort commander was, according to Ukrainian intelligence intercepts cited by Ukrainian military officials, relieved of his patrol assignment following the operation. The intercepts, portions of which were released publicly, showed the commander's radio communications in the minutes following the tanker strike, including a message to his shore command that described the decoy as an attack on my vessel rather than a diversion. He had reported that he was engaging an incoming threat and defending his unit. His command hadn't understood that his vessel was never the target. The logs of his radio communications, cross-referenced with satellite tracking of the patrol boat's movement, showed exactly what Ukrainian planners had designed: a commander doing his job correctly, in response to a threat that was designed specifically to make him do his job in the wrong place. This is the sophistication that makes Ukrainian maritime operations worth studying. It's not just technical capability, Magura drones, satellite intelligence, AIS pattern analysis. It's the ability to model an adversary's behavior and design an operation that turns predictable defensive responses into attack enablers. Will operations like this fundamentally change how the Shadow Fleet routes crude, or will Moscow simply accept the losses and keep moving? Comment why yes. The fleet adapts, or no. The economics don't change. The aftermath of the Azov operation produced several immediate and measurable effects. Satellite imagery analysis in the weeks following the strike showed a significant reduction in tanker traffic through the Azov corridor. Vessels that had previously been making regular transits between Russian eastern Azov ports and the Kerch Strait began holding at anchor for extended periods, apparently waiting for escort availability that couldn't be guaranteed. One commercial maritime tracking service reported that the number of transit events in the corridor dropped measurably following the operation. The escort problem hadn't been solved by Russian logistics planners. It had been exposed. The Raptor-class patrol boat, adequate as a deterrent against threats that behaved predictably, had been made irrelevant by a decoy that cost a fraction of the tanker's value. Russian Naval Command in the Azov theater faced a force structure problem with no easy answer. To adequately protect every vessel in the corridor against decoy-enabled Magura attacks would require multiple escorts per tanker, an escort-to-cargo ratio that made the economics of the operation marginal. The crude was still there. The buyers were still there. But the route had become expensive in ways that didn't show up on a manifest. The Ukrainian drone operators who executed the strike returned to their facility, filed their mission reports, and went back to work. No parade, no announcement for several days. The operation was confirmed through open-source satellite imagery analysis before any official statement. This is the operational security discipline that has characterized Ukrainian drone warfare since the program's early days. The work speaks, and the operators remain silent. One final number that matters: the replacement cost of a Shadow Fleet tanker of this class, factoring in the difficulty of acquiring vessels under current sanctions conditions, is estimated at between $12 and $20 million. The cost of the two Magura V5 drones expended in the operation is a small fraction of that figure. This is the economic arithmetic of modern maritime interdiction. A 320-kilogram warhead, delivered with precision after 11 days of intelligence work, inflicts costs that dwarf the investment. The Sea of Azov is quiet now, but the wreck remains, visible in satellite imagery, a dark shape in 8 meters of brown water. The escort that was supposed to prevent this circles the area, periodically. The shore radar belts that were supposed to make this impossible continue to operate, and every captain who moves Russian crude in these waters now does the math differently. That is the lesson. Not just that Ukrainian naval drones can reach the Azov. They already knew that. The lesson is that Ukrainian intelligence can track a vessel across 11 days and 3 ports, model the behavior of its escort, design a decoy operation that turns defensive reflexes into attack opportunities, and execute the whole sequence in 11 minutes and 30 seconds. The answer to the quiz from earlier: Ukrainian naval drone operations across the combined Black Sea and Azov theater during the relevant operational period documented strike engagements against approximately 38 vessels. Not all sunk, but all damaged or forced to abort their missions. That's option B. The figure reflects the cumulative result of a naval drone program that began with improvised surface vessels and evolved into the precision targeting system that executed the Azov tanker operation. The progression from first-generation prototypes to coordinated decoy-and-strike packages is one of the most rapid capability developments in naval warfare history. Was the decision to use a decoy rather than multiple strike drones the right tactical choice? Based on the outcome, yes. But the question is worth examining. A larger strike package would have increased the probability of reaching the tanker without the decoy maneuver. It would also have been more expensive, more visible on radar, and more likely to trigger an early warning that allowed the tanker to call for additional escort reinforcement. The decoy approach was cheaper, faster, and exploited behavioral prediction rather than weight of numbers. In the terminology of modern operational art, it was an information domain solution to a physical domain problem. Could Russian Naval Command have prevented this? Only at prohibitive cost. An effective defense against the decoy-and-strike model requires either multiple simultaneous escorts that cannot be drawn out of position simultaneously, or the elimination of the threat source. The Ukrainian coastal launch positions. Russian strikes on Ukrainian-controlled territory have targeted drone launch facilities repeatedly. The facilities move. The program continues. What would you have done differently, commanding the Russian Azov patrol sector, after the first Magura operations demonstrated the vulnerability of single escort logistics? The answer matters, because the Russian command answer, more of the same, with incremental additions, has consistently failed to match the pace of Ukrainian adaptation. Subscribe to Ukraine Radar, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Sea of Azov is quiet now, but the wrecks remain. In the shallow brown water of an inland sea that Moscow thought geography had protected forever, the lesson is already being studied by navies that are taking notes. Stay vigilant.